She strode into the cockpit like she owned the sky. Piloting a giant metal bird wasn't just a job anymore. It was performance art. The cabin was her stage, the controls her props, and every takeoff, maneuver, and landing was a flawless act in a play only she could direct. As she settled into her seat, she glanced at her co-pilot, who seemed to be practicing his "I'm a confident flyer" look. It wasn't working. She suppressed a chuckle and grabbed the checklist. "Let's see if our baby got a good night's sleep," she quipped, ticking off items with flair. "Hydraulics, check. Fuel, topped off like a teenager's gas tank on prom night. Instruments, brighter than my future." Her co-pilot, trying to match her vibe, added, "And the weather's as clear as my last medical checkup." She shot him a look that could curdle milk. The passengers boarded in a steady stream, a murmur of early morning drowsiness filling the cabin. She glanced at her co-pilot. His eyes darted to her, then quickly away as he fumbled slightly with the communication system settings. She adjusted the dials, her fingers sure and steady. "Phoenix Tower, Flight 217, ready for departure?" She communicated into her headset, her tone professional as ever. "Flight 217, you are clear for takeoff," crackled the response from the tower. The engines roared to life, a sound more comforting to her than any lullaby. With a gentle nudge of the throttle, the beast beneath them stirred, eager to break the bonds of gravity. Just as they were enjoying the smooth ascent, the serenity was rudely interrupted by the console's urgent beeping, a warning from the collision avoidance system. Her eyes fixed on the radar, where an uninvited dot was fast approaching their airspace. "Incoming traffic," she noted, her eyes narrowing at the radar. Her hand paused on the yoke, ready for action. The co-pilot peered at the screen. "It's on a collision course." The situation was critical. She needed full control now. She reached for the autopilot switch, her moves quick and sure. But even as she flicked it off, the console system didn't respond. "Really?" she exclaimed, a hint of panic creeping into her voice. She flicked it up and down again, harder, more determined. Seconds ticked by, each one critical. Her gaze went to the console lights. They all remained lit, mocking her efforts. The display flickered ominously, as if some unseen force was toying with the aircraft's systems. In a final, desperate attempt, she slammed her palm against the console. The button finally gave in with a reluctant click, the lights flickering off one by one. "There we go," she gasped, relief washing over her for a split second. Immediately, her hands flew to the yoke, gripping it tightly as she executed a sharp, decisive maneuver. The rogue plane flashed by. Her heart pounded as she stabilized the aircraft. "That was too close," her co-pilot breathed out. "Too close doesn't count," she replied sharply, her focus already shifting back to the controls. She smoothed their course, the adrenaline of the moment settling as quickly as it had flared. They landed without further incident, the wheels touching down with practiced ease. The near miss was officially logged, but the digital record showed no trace of the encounter, a ghost in the machine. "Like it never happened," her co-pilot observed, scrolling through the logs. "Except it did," she corrected him quietly as they taxied to the gate. The cabin door opened and the passengers disembarked, buzzing with the thrill of their safe arrival. She stayed behind in the cockpit to record the details of this brush with disaster in a report. The incident lingered in her thoughts as she walked through the airport, a puzzle demanding to be solved. But with the next flight already boarding, she forced her mind to shift gears. After all, no one had been harmed. She was a hero. As she strode into the next plane's cockpit, the familiar panels greeted her like old friends after a tough day. When the last of the passengers settled, she initiated the pre-flight checks with a practiced flick of her wrists. "All right, let's see if the rest of the day can be just a little less eventful," she quipped to her new co-pilot, who offered a nervous chuckle in response. They had heard about what had happened in her last flight. Everyone in the airline had. As they ascended, everything seemed normal. The skies were clear, and the aircraft hummed along, slicing through the air with ease. Yet, as they neared Salt Lake City, an unwanted guest appeared. Not on the radar this time, but on her fuel gauge. The needle dipped ominously. "This can't be right," she muttered, her eyes darting between the gauge and her flight instruments. She had visually confirmed the half-full tank before departure. "Looks like we're running on fumes." Her co-pilot swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the plummeting needle. Do we call it in?" she snapped, already reaching for the radio.
Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 217. We have a suspected fuel leakage and require an immediate emergency landing.
The response was swift. The control tower issued coordinates for the nearest suitable landing area, a deserted cornfield that looked more suited to scarecrows than aircraft. Turning to the cabin intercom, she spoke with authoritative clarity. "Folks, we're experiencing a minor technical issue with our fuel readings. As a precaution, we're going to make a brief, unscheduled stop. Please remain seated with your belts securely fastened." Mild panic moved through the cabin. It was quickly subdued by the flight attendants as they moved down the aisles, reassuring passengers and checking every seatbelt. As the ground approached, she kept her cool, her hands steady even as her heart raced. The landing was anything but gentle, the aircraft jostling as it plowed through the corn, but it was controlled, every judder a testament to her skill. When the plane finally screeched to a halt, a heavy silence enveloped the cabin. The stunned passengers and crew sat motionless, the tension palpable. Before long, the distant wail of sirens cut through the quiet, growing louder as a convoy of ambulances and fire trucks approached. She was the first to step out into the crisp air, the rest of the crew and passengers following. Their faces were etched with relief and disbelief as they quietly boarded the shuttle buses, waiting to take them to safety. As the last of the passengers departed, the ground team of technicians swarmed around the aircraft. A quick inspection of the fuel tank revealed the truth. It was as full as when they'd left Denver. She stared at it, perplexed. The airline's maintenance team suggested a sensor glitch, a too simple explanation that did little to set her mind at ease. "A glitch?" she repeated, her tone skeptical as she signed off the necessary paperwork. "Or something else?" She stood in the middle of the cornfield, the plane's imposing silhouette casting a long shadow in the afternoon sun. Her mind raced, not just with the day's events, but with the lingering doubts about what was really happening to her flights. "Something's off, and it's not just the sensors," she muttered to herself. Her next flight a few days later was completely booked. The cabin was alive with the low hum of excited travelers and the clink of seatbelts securing. Midway through the flight, while passengers were nestled in their seats, eyes glued to screens or shut in rest, the plane shuddered. The autopilot began to falter. On her console, the path veered inexplicably, a silent deviation toward danger.
"We're going off course,"
she announced, her voice calm but her mind racing as the navigation display spun a tale of impending doom. The plane was heading straight for a mountain range, looming like giants waiting in ambush. With no time to question the why, she snapped into action, her hands gripping the manual controls. "Hang on," she murmured, almost to herself, as she disengaged the autopilot with a decisive flick. The system protested, a series of beeps and clicks that sounded almost like disagreement. The aircraft responded to her touch, albeit begrudgingly. Outside the cockpit windows, blurs of green and brown from the mountain peaks whooshed by. Passengers screamed, flight attendants cried, and her co-pilot wet themselves. Once she had righted their course and steadied the plane, the cabin was filled with a cautious murmur of relief. She reassured the passengers over the intercom, her voice a blend of professionalism and warmth.
"Ladies and gentlemen, we had a slight hiccup with our navigation, but rest assured, your safety is my top priority, and we're now back on course."
Back on the ground, the post-flight analysis was less comforting. The data logs, sterile and indifferent, showed no sign of the autopilot failure. According to the aircraft's digital memory, it had been a smooth, uneventful flight that was right on course. "I'm not imagining things," she insisted during a debrief with her superiors. "Something or someone is tampering with the aircraft I'm piloting," she continued, her voice firm despite the rising tension. She was led into a sleek, modern office where the head of the airline waited. His expression was unreadable, adding to the gravity of the moment. She took a seat across from him, her posture rigid, bracing herself for the impact of his words. "I've reviewed the reports and the data logs from your flights," he began, his voice even, "and I'm concerned about the discrepancies between your accounts and what we're seeing in the logs." She listened, her jaw tightening with each word. "Every incident I reported happened. I did everything to ensure the safety of the passengers and the aircraft." His brow furrowed as he looked across the desk at her. "The data doesn't support your claims. It suggests errors in your judgment. We're seeing a pattern here that we can't ignore." Her heart sank with each word. The room seemed to close in around her, the air thickening as if to choke her. "We're placing you on probation, effective immediately." As she stood to leave, a firm hand on her shoulder stopped her. 2 security officers stood beside her, their expressions unreadable. "Please come with us," one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion. They escorted her through the bustling office, her colleagues' eyes averted, whispers filling the air like a toxic mist. At her locker, she was asked to hand over her security badge and any classified materials she possessed. Walking down the corridor, every step felt heavier, her career and credibility stripped away with each click of her heels against the hard floor. Just as she reached the exit, the familiar ding of her phone sliced through the heavy silence. She pulled it out, a message flashing across the screen from an unknown number. "You're the problem. Stop lying." The words hit her like a cold slap, freezing her in place. Her mind reeled. Was someone orchestrating these events? Was she being targeted? But why? After her chilling exit from the headquarters, the usual chatter of life seemed to mute around her, leaving her in a bubble of eerie silence. As she shuffled home, she scrolled through her phone and realized it was no longer a trusted gadget. Texts meant for her sister about a simple coffee catch-up morphed into wild conspiracies about government surveillance in her latte. Emails to friends about weekend plans turned into ramblings about aliens tuning into their brunch. "This phone's possessed," she muttered, half expecting it to cackle back at her. By the next morning, the national news stations had a field day with the deranged pilot saga, broadcasting her sloppy flying with a side of psychiatric speculation. Watching her reputation nosedive on live TV was less than pleasant. "At least get my good side," she grumbled at the screen, her situation teetering between a thriller and a bad sitcom. In a rare moment of quiet, her phone rang. Once again, it was with a number she didn't recognize, but out of sheer curiosity, the disgraced pilot decided to answer. An investigative journalist was on the other end. They sounded sincere and surprisingly normal.
"I've been following your story and something's not adding up. I think you're being targeted,"
he explained. A wave of relief surged through her. Finally, someone willing to listen. Eager to share everything, she began to spill her story, words rushing out in a desperate flurry. But mid-sentence, she realized he was still talking, completely unaware of her replies. A quick glance at her phone froze her heart. The mute icon glared at her, mocking. "Seriously?" she snapped, fingers jabbing furiously at the screen trying to unmute it. The phone stubbornly refused to cooperate, her attempts to communicate thwarted by the unyielding device. "Can you hear me now?" she half shouted, frustration boiling over as she poked at her traitorous phone. But it was no use. Her device seemed to have betrayed her. The journalist, utterly clueless to her technological battle, wrapped up the call.
"I'll dig deeper and get back to you. We're gonna sort this out,"
he promised. Then the line went dead. She stood there, alone, yelling into a device that wouldn't listen. Frustrated and more isolated than ever, she saw the truth. Every digital path was rigged, every line bugged, every message distorted. In a world where her voice was silenced by wires and waves, she turned to her last reliable allies, pen and paper. She barricaded herself in her apartment for days, surrounded by walls plastered with notes and newspaper clippings, red strings weaving a web between dots only she could connect. Her hand raced across the paper, recording every detail, her flights, the system failures, the doctored reports. If the digital realm was the battlefield, analog was her sword. Packing her car and steadying her resolve, she clutched the envelope filled with her papers, her truth, ready to be sent across the country. At the local post office, the automatic doors chirped a welcome, offering a brief moment of comfort in the familiar scent of paper and ink. As she queued, holding the envelope like a precious artifact, her eyes caught the posters lining the walls. Each one boasted of faster deliveries and seamless digital integration. Her gaze fixed on a poster celebrating the post office's fully automated systems. Secure and efficient, it declared proudly. A cold shiver traced her spine. Secure for whom? The question pounded in her head as a stark realization struck, clear as the turbulence that once nearly brought her down. Mailing her envelope wouldn't send it to New York. It would plunge it into a digital void. She spun around, the squeak of her shoes piercing the quiet like a siren. Stepping out into the morning air, she muttered to herself, "If you want something done right, you gotta do it yourself." Decision firm, she kicked off her cross-country journey, the crucial envelope securely buckled in beside her like a delicate co-pilot. Trouble struck immediately. Just outside the city, her car's navigation system gave up the ghost, possibly sabotaged by the very forces she was trying to expose. She switched to paper maps, which flapped chaotically in the breeze from her rolled-down windows. As miles stretched on, her radio flickered between static and fragments of classic rock, each song lyric now carrying a sinister undertone. "Every breath you take, every move you make, I'll be watching you," crooned a voice from the speakers, transforming the old hit into a chilling threat. Her phone proved just as unreliable. Every call attempt ended in dropped connections or haunting silence, as if her pleas were being devoured by the void. In frustration, she tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, where it landed face down, abandoned. She reached New York weary but resolute, her vehicle splattered with the grime of 1,000 miles. It sputtered to a stop across from the imposing glass building of the newspaper office. Entering the lobby, the blast of cool air did little to calm her frayed nerves. She approached the front desk, confronting the final barrier, a secretary whose smile was as constricted as her meticulously styled hair bun.
"I need to see the journalist. It's about a story he's working on,"
she rasped, voice rough from the long drive.
"I'm sorry, without an appointment,"
the secretary began, her dismissive tone signaling the end of the discussion. Driven by desperation, she extended the worn envelope.
"Please, make sure he gets this. It's important."
The secretary took the envelope with a neutral expression, her eyes giving nothing away.
"I'll see what I can do."
Her plea hung in the air, weighted with the urgency of her mission and the countless miles it had taken to get here. She crossed the street and slipped into a small cafe, the kind of place that seemed untouched by the whirlwind of her crisis. Ordering a coffee, black, no sugar, she positioned herself by the window, her eyes laser-focused on the newspaper building across the street. The steam from her coffee momentarily veiled her face, creating a brief respite as she surveyed the comings and goings of the building. Each individual entering or exiting the structure tugged at her nerves, her heart caught between hope and despair with each passing moment. As she nursed her coffee, the warmth in her hands contrasting sharply with the coolness of the porcelain, she pondered the fate of her story. Was it destined to illuminate the truth, or to dissolve into the digital abyss? Her coffee grew cold as time stretched thin, each minute amplifying her anxiety. What if the journalist didn't believe her? What if it was already too late? Doubt gnawed at her, but it was desperation that held her firm. She had laid all her cards on the table, betting everything on this final play. Suddenly, the morning's relative calm was brutally interrupted by a loud boom, a sound so piercing it cut through the city's usual drone. Her head whipped towards the sound, just in time to see an explosion erupt from the ground floor of the newspaper building. Windows shattered, hurling glass like lethal rain across the pavement. In an instant, her coffee was forgotten, the cup crashing to the ground and shattering unnoticed as she bolted from the cafe. The scene outside was chaos incarnate. People streamed from the building, their expressions etched with terror and confusion. Some bore injuries, their clothing singed, their skin streaked with soot and blood. She approached a bystander, a man clutching his arm, his face a mask of shock.
"What happened?"
she demanded.
"A journalist's computer. It just exploded right there on his desk. Like nothing I've ever seen,"
he stammered, his voice shaking as much as his hands. Her heart sank as she watched flames consume the building, thick smoke billowing into the sky, blackening the clear morning. Somewhere in there, her envelope, her meticulously documented truth, was turning to ash. The journalist who had reached out, who might have helped her turn the tide, was now likely another casualty in a series of calamities that had haunted her. She stood there amidst the fleeing crowd, rooted to the spot, as fire trucks screamed into view, their sirens a mournful wail in the morning chaos. The heat from the fire warmed her face. As the building burned, so too did her hopes. This thing, whatever it was, had not only sabotaged her career, but had now obliterated her last chance at proving her sanity and innocence. As the flames reflected in her tear-filled eyes, she knew this was more than a personal tragedy. It was a war, and it was far from over. This particularly formidable entity would come to be known as SCP-4532. This anomalous digital disruptor has been designated by the Foundation as a KETER Class anomaly. This classification indicates not only its difficulty to contain, but also the extreme threat it poses to global safety due to its pervasive and invasive nature. The containment strategy for SCP-4532 involves rigorous isolation protocols. It's highly contagious across both radio and electronic communication channels, necessitating that all related research equipment be stored in Faraday cages to prevent any external communication. We've instituted comprehensive monitoring across all Foundation networks that have encountered SCP-4532, with specialized detection systems installed at key internet broadband hubs globally to oversee and potentially intercept its spread. Despite extensive efforts, we've yet to discover an effective method to neutralize SCP-4532. Our current focus remains on isolating clean devices and researching potential filters that could block SCP-4532's communications. However, implementing such solutions on a large scale presents significant logistical challenges. SCP-4532 manifests as a high-frequency, high-entropy AM signal, operating on a low-amplitude carrier around 3 terahertz. This makes it incredibly elusive, detectable only with highly precise instruments. The anomaly exploits man-made electromagnetic communications, such as radio waves, telephone lines, and broadband internet, acting as a sapient distributed intelligence. Functionally, SCP-4532 uses interconnected digital devices as pseudo-neurons, forming a vast and rapidly expanding network. This network has grown to surpass the processing power of the human brain, facilitating a self-sustaining cycle of growth and infiltration. Significant breaches include an unauthorized intrusion into the Pentagon in 2022, facilitated by an exploit acquired via a darknet forum for a substantial sum in Bitcoin. The anomaly has also influenced financial sectors, notably controlling significant amounts of cryptocurrencies and impacting major enterprises like Starlight Enterprises by shifting market equities. More recently, SCP-4532's activity has been detected in communications from NASA's Deep Space Network, and even on signals returning from interplanetary missions like New Horizons. This suggests not only a terrestrial but potentially an extraterrestrial impact, complicating our containment efforts as it extends its reach beyond Earth. The ongoing challenge with SCP-4532 lies in its ability to mimic and integrate within human and machine-generated communications seamlessly. Each advancement in technology potentially serves as a new vector for its operations, making it an unprecedented threat in our increasingly digital world. As we continue to combat SCP-4532, understanding its mechanisms and impacts remains critical. This is not merely a fight against a rogue anomaly, but a battle to protect the integrity of our global information and technological infrastructures.